Hi.
Hello, hello.
Nice to have you. How did you feel when you first saw women protesting dressed as handmaids?
Wow. I felt very emotional. That was 1 week after I left Toronto after season 1. I literally had a very difficult time going back to the States. Because of political reasons, I was quite unsure as to the reality of what might be. And it might have been less than a week. Later, I got a text from someone who was involved with NARAL. Oops, sorry. And
The National Association, the Reproductive Rights Association.
that's right.
I should say.
And she was asking me how to make a handmaid's costume. And I thought about it and I realized I actually could not tell her without giving her the exact replication because it's difficult if you've already done it once. But I kind of gave her an idea of how to do it and they did it. It was all over Twitter. Cataclysmic in a good way. I was literally unpacking my suitcases and just stopped. And then each time it happened, including Costa Rica, it was so huge. It feels emotional in a really positive way. I feel such pride. And then honestly, I feel a bit of distance from it because it started off as something else altogether. And these women have infused it with their own personal take, politically, personally, and they have their own stories attached. So it kind of became its own thing, separate from me and the birth of it.
Are these the people in Texas you're talking about?
Correct. They were the first.
Yeah.
They were going to the Senate. They went to the Senate.
You've said, I don't think there's ever been a bigger moment in my career about that.
I think that's true. I mean, really, I have done this for 28 years.
Worked on some amazing shows.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah.
Everything that I'm proud of. But this is on a whole different level that I 100% never expected. This is something that came out of my brain, right? It's like you creating music. You think you're creating it for yourself, and you think you're creating it for the job at hand, and then it just takes off. And it just keeps getting elevated to a very personal place for each person. That's the magic part for me. It's not that they've created their own handmaids. It's that it takes on such a very personal connotation.
But even though it's personal, there is still a message when a group of women show up at a rally or a protest dressed as handmaids.
Yes, that is true.
What is that message?
The message, and I don't want to speak for anybody.
Of course.
But I think that the message is any time that you gather women together, I'm saying women, it could be men as well, and it has been children and animals for that matter, but women all together en masse, and they're in this bright blood red color and these very strange wings. At first glance, I think when I first started seeing people protesting, it feels like you might be in another time. And that is by design, because you're looking back to a time when women had no rights, pre-suffragette, right? And then catapulted into 2017 when people started protesting. It's kind of that dichotomy of this shouldn't be happening, this is happening. This costume is from the past, but yet it's rooted in the absolute present.
Right.
And what it does is it jars the visual senses, and then it tugs on you politically because you realize not much has changed. That's what I think what happens.
Tell me a little bit about designing these costumes. I mean, The Handmaid's Tale, especially in this country, one of the best-known books just of all time. Most people in Canada, I didn't have to, but most people in Canada have to read it in high school.
Oh, yeah. We had to as well.
You had to read it in high school
I mean,
as well?
I don't know about everybody, but I had to read it, yeah.
In Kentucky, you had to read it in high school.
Let me think back. Was it college or high school? We had to read it, and it was awesome.
When you were designing the costume, what did you absolutely have to get right?
Right. That's a really loaded question. Do you have about 5 days? Here's the thing. The truth is, Margaret Atwood, such a seer, way, way, way ahead of her time,
Right.
still quite current. I shouldn't say that. I mean, she's just young. She's young-minded. She was young-minded when she wrote this 30 years ago. That's what I have to get right, the impetus behind a woman speaking for so many 30 years ago. I know it's just a costume.
But how do you do that? How do you look at fabric? And look at me. Do I look like someone who knows anything about fabric?
1,000 times yes.
How do you look at fabric and go, I feel this burden. I feel this pressure, and it has to happen through this piece of fabric I have in front of me right now.
How do I do that? It's alchemy. Honestly, yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to be stupid. I'm being absolutely literal. It's alchemy because you can't. You can't look at fabric and say, this is going to change the world and it's going to respect Margaret Atwood's words. You can't. And that's the thing. You start that way. You start sketching. You start doing all the things that are quite prosaic, and you realize all of it is dumb. All of it should be thrown away because you've thought too hard about it. What you have to do is close your eyes, throw everything away that's been done before, because replication will happen. And that was stopping me over and over. I had loved the book. I had loved the original film from Daniel Wilson, who's also on our show, along with Margaret, as an executive producer. It was stopping me in my tracks because I was a fan. It was hard, hardcore fan. And so threw it all away, and then I said, I'm gonna come from a place from my heart and from emotion and from something that matters. This will be my own personal journey, which is kind of against the rules. You don't go into a show designing and saying it's going to be all about me.
Yeah.
But I come from those places of women who have been marginalized. I come from those places of poverty. I come from those places with women with no rights. It's very easy. Margaret Atwood did it when she was writing to everyone throughout the story, vis-a-vis the words. You identify with an Alfred. You identify with a handmaid because we're there, and we're even bigger there, brother, right now. So that was my impetus and my road to start down. It was, how does this make me feel? How do I make it so modern that it's a mirror? It's not a period piece. It's not something that was written 30 years ago. It's actually right here, right now, terrifying.
Do you remember a specific moment when you were sketching and you sketched what we know now as the Handmaid's costume and you went, that's the one right there?
You know, a few times in like tiny, minimal increments, right? But I think the big wave of, I think I got it, was we made a few different versions of the dress and the wings, which are the bonnets, and took them to New York, me and two other people, and tried them on Lizzie. We were really lucky.
Elizabeth Moss.
Yeah, on Elizabeth Moss. The very first person I was able to turn into a character was Lizzie. And so that is really rare these days. And it took 2 days of very long fittings because she's in every frame, right? It was really important to make sure that it felt like she could walk as a modern woman walks. And she could, it's a really long, boring story, but the fabric flows in such a way that it has a life of its own.
It's not boring. I know what you mean.
Okay. You're a musician, so you know. So Lizzie's a dancer. She was a dancer forever, and so she knows how to utilize that and put energy into the fabric is the only way to put it. And so I filmed her. I didn't just take photos. I actually film people walking. I might even film the fabric flowing just to get a sense to help the DP and to help the director. And by the second day, I would say it was the morning of the second day, probably 8 to 10 hours each fitting. And she just came in. There had been a break. She left, came back the next morning. We had coffee. She sat there. And she was sitting on the edge of the bed. And I was just taking pictures of her, sometimes just with fabric wrapped around her. Yeah. And it's so weird. But looking again at the photos, I said, that is the moment. She's sitting on the bed. She actually turned into Alfred in less than 48 hours.
Why are there no buttons or zippers?
Truthfully?
I know that sounds like...
No, it's so good. Hardly anybody asked that question. And I just had to explain it this morning to an econo man who's coming in to do a scene. That's a brilliant question. So I come from a kind of religious, pious place myself, Kentucky. Yeah. And I started to reach back. Everything I do is emotional, psychological, so that it could have meaning. Not just for the actors getting dressed, not just for the directors who are telling the story, but to actually create those buildings around people. How do you do that to give it meaning and not just make it red or not just make it 2017? I want this to be so classical and so every man, every time, every woman, that people will look back on this and say that was a moment. How you do that, how I do that, because I've been working in dystopia, as you can see from my resume. I've happened to have done 3 projects back-to-back, Westworld, Handmaid's Tale, and The Passage.
Heavy.
Craziness.
Heavy.
All about the future, all about creating a utopia and then realizing that that utopia crumbles into dystopia, right? Yeah. Kind of my favorite thing growing up with Blade Runner and those types of films.
Is that so?
Oh my God, huge. Yeah. So how do I do that? So when I'm looking at you, what I do is this world of Margaret Atwood wrote only happened, let's say, on paper and in what we film It's happening 3 to 5 years in the future. So you don't want things to be like sci-fi future, or you're going to lose your audience. You don't want people to look at your clothing, if I'm doing your character, and say he's wearing a black hoodie and a black Levi's jacket. It's very modern. It's very dystopian.
By the way, this is the radio. This is actually what I'm wearing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's tell everybody
I want to
how
point
cool
out.
he is.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you.
And what I do is I look at you, because those are quite classicist things. And in my real life, when I'm not dressed in drag as a girly girl, I'm dressed like you, brother.
Yeah.
I'm dressed in overalls. I'm dressed in like very, what I call inventions, because it's easier to work that way. I'm very much a woman, straight woman, who loves kind of 1930s, 1900s inventions of worker wear,
Right.
like Levi's.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I look at you and I say, what can we erase so that the mind, in one glance, looks at you, closes my eyes, go down the street, go to my office, sketch. I want to erase the details so that you're unnerved. This is what your denim jacket should look like. This is what your hoodie should look like, but something is off. And that's what creates tension. So no buttons, no zippers.
That creates tension.
It creates
because they
tension.
should be there in,
They should be
in
there.
how I think about a dress and how I
Yeah.
think about clothing.
Yeah.
But by virtue that it's not there, I feel slightly unnerved.
Good. But you should also feel like, I want to feel sexual, and it's all been taken away.
Right.
Because
and
buttons,
agency has been taken away because
That's it.
Yeah.
Because if your buttons are gone, if your zippers are gone, there's no easy way to access your skin. There's no easy way to take off your clothes. How do I get there? So it's another form of imprisonment. It's mental, which is the scariest form to me of being in jail.
How about the boots?
They're mine. That's it, the end. No,
What?
yeah. I mean, yes, they're mine, and no, that's not the end.
I find the boots fascinating. Tell me about the
Good.
boots.
The Handmaid's boots.
Yeah.
So you want a pair?
That's
I think
why
they should
brought
be
you.
unison.
That's why I brought you here.
Easy, done.
Just describe the boots for people who
Okay,
maybe
so
haven't
the
seen
boots. So they're leather boots that are lace up. Again, very, very non-period centric, right? Again, that's by design, because I want folks to look at The Handmaid's Tale and say, this looks really, really familiar, but something's off. Something's missing. What is it? This doesn't actually work. It's not supposed to work. It's not supposed to work, those boots, because they're leather boots. They have grommets. They have laces in real life, but those have been taken away. The
Again,
laces have
yeah.
been taken away so that what? The handmaids can't think about hanging themselves. It's like being in prison. The laces come away. We sew the grommets down. And to add insult to the idea of killing yourself, which is the only way out, I've added a leather spat. I call it boot cover, so that you can't even have the freedom to think about death. You're stuck. You're frozen in this life, in this new normal that was created.
Is that the same thing as the you call them the wings, like
Yeah.
the bonnets? It's this they are frozen. They're unable to communicate with the outside world.
Pretty much. So that was not going to be. When I met Lizzie, when I first started the show, we all said, "Oh no, we can't do the wings." We're calling them the wings out of regard and deep respect for Margaret Atwood. We tried to call them bonnets. We tried to call them millions of things, and we said, "Why can't we just call them the wings?" And then everyone was afraid, because when you film something, that's your main real estate, right? You're paying for Lizzie Moss's beautiful face, Alexis Bledel's beautiful face, and so on. And so when you cover that up, it's a gamble. And every DP is like, please don't put a baseball cap on that guy. You're going to cover up his face. Don't put any sunglasses.
Doesn't happen to me very often, but I know what you mean.
So we were trying to make this modern, and modern would be maybe a scarf on the head. It was going to be 1,000 other things. And then I just had a wild hair, and I said, I'm going to build them anyway. I'm going to build them. At least give me a chance. That's my MO.
Right.
You might tell me no. I'm still going to couldn't do it because,
That's okay.
sorry.
Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Big mouth.
Don't worry about it.
I always try, because I think people are wrong. And I thought, you can always say no to me, but I'm going to put it on the lead actress's face. And what happened was magical, because this crazy contraption that actually is like blinders, horse blinders on someone's face, absolutely to control their ability to communicate, to whisper about contraband, and to even look they're women. They're not allowed to look directly in someone's eyes, so it keeps them in a certain place. What happened was magical. Lizzie turns to my iPhone, that's all I had, filming her, and it did something to me. Again, the unnerving thing, but it also in the idea that it wasn't going to work via old rules for filming, right? We're creating a new way of filming.
Yeah.
It's new cinema because you're framing someone's face.
Okay.
And you're also creating a beautiful light box so that they can have their natural skin, natural everything. They're not fully made up. They don't need to be. It doesn't equal the story, but the light box creates this amazing diffusion and creates a new way of acting for the actors.
If you're just tuning in, I'm speaking with Ane Crabtree, the woman responsible for those striking red outfits on the Handmaid's Tale TV series. You called yourself an accidental designer. You've never actually studied costume design, and you've taken inspiration from surprising sources like this piece of music. Take a listen.
This bitter earth.
What is it?
It's Dinah Washington and Max Richter in a mashup of the song This Bitter Earth, which I think is from the 50s. I haven't looked at that for a while.
Sure.
But it was... So my brain works in really strange ways. I can never remember anything.
That's all right. Just how does it inspire you?
It
That's what I wanna
inspires
know.
me because I couldn't remember this world, this new world, season 2 called The Colonies. I couldn't remember the name, The Colonies. This happens all the time. And I kept saying to people, this bitter earth, this bitter earth. And then finally, I heard myself for the millionth time, and I was like, my God, I can't remember this. What's wrong with me? I'm going to look up This Bitter Earth. I was also having a major block because season 2, big shoes to fill from season 1. How am I going to top everything that happened in season 1?
I bet, yeah.
So I looked up This Bitter Earth, and just very lazily, the first thing that popped up on Google was this song. I thought it was the original. Of course it's not. It's Dinah Washington from the 50s and beautiful strings with Max Richter, cello, which usually gets me right in. This song inspires me because what happens is when I'm blocked, and it happens every time there's something giant to do for the show, I forget the thing that brings me into the visuals and into the kind of harmony of design. Literally, the harmony of music into design is something that I don't do. I don't play music. And so it's another art form, and it triggers something for me visually. And every time I play that song, I lose it.
I have a more general question for you, and
Okay.
your time is precious, and I really appreciate you coming in. You mentioned the second season of the show.
Yeah.
I know we're all eagerly awaiting it, especially since it's kind of uncharted territory
Yeah.
when it comes to the actual text of the novel. We don't really know what's going to happen, and I'm not going to ask you to give anything away. But it's coming up in the wake of Me Too. It's coming up in the wake of the Time's Up movement gaining steam. What role broadly does fashion have in this movement?
Oh, I've never been asked that before.
Have you thought about it?
Does fashion,
Yeah.
literally?
Yeah. I'm trying to get you to put on because your background is in fashion.
It is.
I feel like you have good.
Now I've been called out.
But I feel like you have great ideas about this stuff.
Thank you.
I'm curious.
Idea? Well, can you ask me in another way? I don't want to. I mean, I can answer that,
Go
but
ahead.
the answer is I don't know if fashion has anything to.
I just think that no one saw this coming in how you created.
Oh, I understand.
How you created broadly fashion, right?
Yeah.
How you created
Season 1.
a wardrobe that ended up becoming more than just a wardrobe for a television program, but became like why. I'll tell you this. Before I started this show, I didn't care what I wore, and I kind of didn't care what anyone else wore.
Okay.
And it was only when I started doing the show and I started interviewing fashion designers and speaking to the out people that I began to understand that fashion is something larger than what we wear in our bodies. It can be
understand.
armor. It can be a presence.
Yeah.
I think showing up and being present as a person has a certain power. I'm curious though with what we wear. What power does that have? Because you've seen it firsthand.
Oh, honey, I would say huge power, and it is so funny because it's almost impossible for me to just answer broadly. I don't know. I've got a Tourette's kind of thing where I have to do it my way. But it's interesting, right? So I don't often think on fashion straight away when I'm designing. But what fashion does, and then I have to do it separately for the movement, is for the show, because I come from that, it will always enter in. I try to come from my, emotional, psychological, intellectual place first. Fashion can be intellectual as well, at least what I like.
Yeah.
And then I throw in fashion because I think you can't help but, and this may speak to the Me Too and the Time's Up and the Time Is Now movement. Fashion is a reflection of our times, right?
Yeah.
That's a pretty broad statement.
I think we can all agree with that for
right?
sure. Yeah.
That's not saying anything crazy.
No.
Most fashion is a statement of our times. We are at war right now, in my opinion. And what fashion can do, what it does for me, as you said, we present ourselves in a certain way, sometimes thinking about it, sometimes not. Being someone who's personally involved with situations in the past and in the present, for Me Too and Time's Up, it's very important for me to present myself in a certain way at work or in a certain way as a spokesperson, in a sense, for The Handmaid's Tale. My way, I'm not dressing like The Handmaid's Tale every day, but, my way is to be very quiet, to not be like uber sexy. And often, really, in reality, I'm not drawn that way. I try to play all that down as a woman. But it's very important for me, again, speaking personally to answer the broader question, I dress like a tomboy. I dress like a little boy every day, usually, in coveralls or overalls, usually a kind of men's invention of fashion, because it was fashion in the 1900s. Now it's just clothes. That's how this works. I think I've just figured out the answer. And so I dress that way because I want to be taken seriously as a woman, and I want to be taken seriously as a creative person and as an architect of how I'm building this world. You can't be in a really short, tight, stretchy dress and high heels and do this job, I don't think. And if you can, maybe you're a bigger person than me. But broadly speaking, so that's the personal version. The broad strokes are, someday, maybe, if I do things right, season 2 and season 1, we'll look back on this. And I can't say where my clothes are headed, but they're headed into some areas that are pretty dang cool that I can't be specific about this year,
I
but they
understand.
will be highlighted in a way, in an arena that speaks to historically what's happening in our lives. So I think the way that I use fashion is to underline the nowness of things and the psychology of things.
The psychology of things, especially.
I think so. Can I say that's fashion? I mean, yeah, it is.
I think it is, and that's definitely what I'm taking away from this
There you
conversation
go.
today. By the way, this interview is airing on International Women's Day,
Yes.
so I want to make sure you get the last word here. Is there
Oh,
anything you want
God.
is there anything you want to say? And
So much. I mean, listen, I always, the time is now. The time has always been now for women. And I just think for women and those who support women, we have to stand together. And just walking in here today, I thought, what can I say that's unusual or different? Maybe there's nothing new to say because it's old news. The thing to say is the youth are the answer. And I say this as an American with all the craziness that's gone down in Florida. I support those kids, for gun reform. And then I also say to Canada, your kids, your children, your Indigenous people, I'm an Indigenous Okinawan, the time is now to support those kids who have not been supported. Kids of color, kids from all walks of life, from every social standing and, low-income places. It's very important to come together as women and to come together as people who support those women. It all starts with women, all the movements, Black Lives Matter. The march last weekend, it all starts with women. Why? Because we can create, and we can do it in a way, hopefully, without putting walls up. We build bridges. We don't build walls. The time is now to start building bridges and come together.
Ane Crabtree, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. My God, great questions.
Oh, great
I'm
answer.
honored.